Oh, I have a couple of other questions that I wrote down. Well, one of them's from Suzanne in Seattle. She wants to know when you're moving to Seattle. And I think somebody said, oh, yeah, Andrew Long said, no, you can't move to Seattle. He needs you in Arizona still. And then one of the things she actually did ask that was a serious question was, does it work better for you as a developer to develop in a known universe?
In some respects, I'm going to say it's easier because you have an end goal. In some, you have not an end goal, but you have to relate back to the IP. If I were to develop a game that's supposed to be in the same world as Belfort, for example, there are certain parameters that are true in Belfort that I have to still be true. Things like elves get wood and dwarves get stone. Like things like that. That are just like you're not going to have you're not going to have things that conflict with the basic, IP or universe that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
I guess in Eminent Domain, I'm sure there's an analogous thing where I'm making expansions for Eminent Domain,
Mm-hmm.
and it's nice, even if it's not. It's nice to have things to fall back on that people already know.
Yes.
I'm not adding a 100% new game. I'm being like, oh, you already know that you can buy technology. All I'm adding is that now you can spend ships on it.
Right.
Get it an alternate way. Or something. I don't know if that's a good example. So you can, when you're working with an existing world, you can kind of shortcut some things, or you can fall back on some things that people already know or that are already true. On the flip side of the coin, if you're developing something brand new, you've got the freedom to change stuff that you might not have had if you had to conform to the rules of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So in other respects, it might be easier not to, but I'm going to go ahead and say it's easier, like it's less difficult to design in a universe because you've got those constraints and parameters. However, if you're in a new universe, you've got more freedom. So it might be more work, but you can do more things. You don't have to be as creative to do things. Certain things might be possible that weren't, or that were difficult otherwise.
In that kind of paradigm that we're talking about here, as a developer, how hard is it for you, or how hard have you found it to get your point across to the designers who are kind of the owners of the IP in some weird way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you find you butt heads a lot? Have you found it an easy process? What do you think?
So that might be a better question for the Jays, Sens, Scotts, Alexes and Davids of the world. But I'm going to go ahead and
your perspective.
I will take a stab. I have a feeling. I always feel like I might be a little bit difficult to work with, and here's why. The way that I sort of find the truth of a thing is that, so I have my idea of what I think is true, and then I present that idea, and I sort of argue that idea, and I defend that idea, which sometimes turns into what feels to me like an argument or a fight, and then later I reflect back, and I'm like, was I winning that fight, or was I losing that fight? And if I feel like I was losing that fight, then I'm like, okay, maybe I was wrong. And if I feel like I was winning that fight, then I'm like, I was right. Like that. I stick to it. So, and then you've worked with me. Did you feel like that is something that happened a little bit on Belfort?
I explain it as Seth beats me over the head with math, but but in a good way.
So one of the burdens of being always right,
relatively,
is this. So here's an allegory or a story that I had from one of my earliest, forays into development, you might say.
Yeah.
2003, Boardgame Designers Forum, I read about a game that I thought sounded awesome. It was a Three Musketeers themed game by a guy named David Brain, who lives in London. Mm-hmm. I've actually met him since, but I thought at the time I didn't know who he was. He was some dude on the website, and I said, hey, that sounds awesome. And he was kind enough to send me a prototype in the mail, not like print and play files. Like he mailed me a prototype.
Handmade prototype.
Yes, and it was, it was a, I forget if the board was paper or was just mounted, but it like the little tiny slips of square pieces of paper with letters on them for like the tokens. Yeah, little round cylinders for the characters.
Hmm.
What it was a Three Musketeers game where you didn't control one of the Musketeers. It was called All for One, and there were 6 characters. You know, the Musketeers and Rochefort and Milady de Winter, and they're on the board. And on your turn, you pick one and you do stuff. And
Yeah.
you're trying to complete missions, and the missions have specific people that have to do them and specific plot tokens they have to have. So you run around the board picking up these tokens, bringing them to certain places. And I really like pick up deliver games, and so I like that aspect of it. I think the Three Musketeers is a great, awesome, cool, fun thing, and I've always thought there were not enough. I play a lot of Euro games, and I always wish there'd be Euro games with cool themes, and I thought the Three Musketeers would make a great theme for a Euro game, and I didn't see one. And now, since then, there have been a few that have come out, and I'm not super thrilled with any of them.
Go make your own, Seth.
Well, so All for One, I liked it so much. I liked the idea of it so much that when I got it and I was reading the rules and I was thinking about it, and I was like, my mind was overflowing with ways to make this game better. I've not even played it yet, and I thought, okay, well, to be fair to the designer, I need to play it under his rules, 100% his rules. Before I can't change things before I even play it. So I got some friends together. We played this game, and it was about the most miserable gaming experience. Lots of things were wrong. People were hating it. It was taking a long time. There were all these issues. And in my head, I'm like, oh, these guys are never going to play this game again. And most of the stuff that was going wrong was stuff I thought should have changed anyway. So I was like, all right, well, we played it under the rules, and I think these things need to be different. Now I really think certain things need to be different since we've played it. So I'm like, 2 weeks later, I had the same group of people together, and I had changed. I'm like, let's try it this other way. And I changed a bunch of the rules and dynamics. And we played it again, the same group, and it was still bad, but they admitted that it was better than it was. And for some reason, I liked it so much that I wanted it to be better, so I kept thinking of, like, basically changing stuff and whatever. And I would talk to David Brain. I would talk to him online, emailing and stuff, with all these things. Oh, I think this should be better, and here's why. And I always like to say here's why, because if I don't have a reason, then I don't feel like I should be making a comment. Basically, almost every aspect of the game, I changed it, and then I almost all of those changes he was resistant to, and I kept on him until he eventually, at some point, had agreed to all of my comments. So kind of like I kept having to sort of beat him over the head, or like, no, this with logic or reasoning or math or whatever. And in the end, he agreed to all my changes. And that was just the beginning, because at that point the game was better, but it had a long way to go. And then we co-designed it from that point for like a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were at a spot where it was pretty good, and I was bringing it to conventions, and I thought, you know, this is before I was any published or had any contact with any publishers. I was like, I felt like this was as good as published games out there, and it ought to maybe be published. Right. And it never. That's my biggest disappointment, actually, in as a game designer or developer, is that particular game, All for One, has never been published. And I don't know. At this point, I feel like it's kind of old-fashioned. I'm not sure it ever will be published. But
right.
But that was like a perfect example, what you just said, of me just. I basically went to bat for all of my suggested changes, and I defended them and argued with the designer. And in the end, he agreed with all of my comments. And since then, things have changed. But that's kind of how I go about it. And I really feel like sometimes I antagonize the designers, and I apologize to all the designers I've worked with if I have. But that's sort of my process.
Yeah, no, but I've said that's a good thing. Like I told you, I need that pit bull.
Yeah.
And you're that pit bull for me, and I think that's a good thing.
Like designers, like, the game is their baby, right? And they rightfully want what's best for it. But as a developer, if I'm especially in a professional, like if I'm developing it for TMG to publish, for example, mm-hmm. I have to adopt that baby. I have to treat it as my own. Otherwise, how am I going to possibly care enough to get it to try to make it any better, right? So in a way, I feel like I'm sort of taking ownership, of some of these games.
You're a surrogate father,
right? Which is kind of what I'm doing. And I try to keep the designers involved. Like I don't just make changes willy-nilly and don't tell them because I don't think that's right. It's not less that I don't think it's right even, but more that I feel like as the designer they might have tried that already and have some comments on it. If I have an idea, maybe this would be better. Like if they've already tried that and it didn't work, that's worth knowing. Not only that, but they can playtest the change. On their end. There's all kinds of reasons why it's a good idea to keep the designer involved.
Yeah. It's an interesting difference from a couple other companies that we work with for sure. So.
Well, that's kind of comes down to the difference. Well, the difference between the companies, but also the difference between the designers. If they're a designer who's not interested in doing the playtesting or caring, like they give you a game and you're like, oh, this should be different, and they're like, sure, whatever, and they don't have any interest, then maybe it's not worth worrying about keeping them in the loop. On the other hand, if you have a designer who's very active and wants to be part of the process, then it makes them feel good. They like, in my experience, they like being part of the process. They like being in there. Possibly, sometimes a little bit too much. When it gets, sometimes at some point it gets to the point where it's, we gotta move on. We gotta get this art done. We gotta get the deadlines. And if I actually wrote a post about this on the League of Game Makers. So as a designer of games, you have to decide if you want, how much of this control, how much input you really want to have, and if you want 100% input, maybe you need to not sign it to a publisher. Maybe you need to publish. Yeah. If you want no input, great, whatever. But if you want, at some point, you gotta say, okay, it's out of my hands. They're publishing the game now. It's at the manufacturer or whatever, or they have a deadline. And it's gonna depend on the publisher, the size, and what their preference is. It's gonna depend on the designer. You guys had done on your show, talked to the what was it called, Cardboard Edison, about their survey, and it's found in your survey, or they had found in their survey that a lot of first-time designers tend to want and get more creative control over stuff like art and stuff like that in their contracts than veteran designers. I highly suspect that's because the people that are publishing games by first-time designers are also small or new publishers and don't have the system set up or enough people to worry about those things. Versus, if you were to somehow sign your first game with Fantasy Flight, you're probably not getting that control, right?
Oh, not at all.
Right. So, but if you're a first-time designer, what are the chances you're signing with Fantasy Flight?
Pretty low.
So there you go. So I think that survey might have had a little bit of bias in that respect. So bottom line was, I apologize to my designer friends if I antagonized them with my "it must be this way." Only a couple of times have I ever done the thing. You hear stories about like, oh, the publisher changed my rule and I didn't like it. I've twice now had that sort of happen with a rule. One of them was kind of funny. I came up to the end of the development cycle, and we're getting things published for Captains of Industry. And Michael Keller, I found out that Michael Keller and I had been playing. He had been playing with a rule that I didn't even know existed the entire time.
Oh.
It was just a bonus scoring, like one more bonus scoring condition. Like
end
of the round. I don't know if you've played Captains of Industry, but at the end of the round, there's you score bonuses for certain, like 3 different things. He had a 4th thing that he was rewarding. And when he mentioned that, like last minute, we were looking at the rule book, and he's like, "Hey, this is missing." And I'm like, "What's missing? I don't know what you mean." And I looked back at the rule book he sent me, and it wasn't in there. And he had been playing it basically ever since he sent me that rule book. He made the update, and he'd been playing that way forever, and I never had. And I was like, "That's weird."
Yeah.
But in the end, I was like,
that you need up-to-date files for everybody, right?
Well, so I mean, whatever. I guess he thought he'd send it to me. Whatever the case may be. It came down to me saying, well, do I add that thing that the designer has been playing with his entire time and I've never played with, or do I, put the rule book out with what I'm familiar with and comfortable with, and to tell you the truth, I didn't think that extra thing was needed. There was already a bunch of stuff rewarding that particular thing, so I'm like, I gotta go with the rules as I understand them at this point because we're done. So I'm like, you can. I'm sorry. I hope this doesn't I hope he wasn't too upset about that. And in the end, I think he's not. I think he thinks it works fine now that I've talked to him about it. But I'm like, you can chalk that up to one of those stories that the publisher changed the rule on you if you want to. And I felt a little bad about it, but I think at the point where we're publishing it, we being TMG,
Mm-hmm.
we
It's
can't.
gotta go.
Yeah, we can't change a rule that we haven't tested at the
Yeah.
last.
Oh, I agree.
So
We keep
I think
developing right until the end, but
a similar thing happened on like one other game. I don't think that happened on something like I don't think on Belfort that happened.
nope.
I don't think on any of the other games that we've done that's really happened where I've in the end said it's like this and I'm sorry that's the end of it. But something similar happened I think on one we're just finishing up now. But I think the designer and I got it worked out before the end. But yeah, so it was weird. I don't know how common that is, but for me it's not common because I pretty much keep the designer in the loop the entire time.
Right, and I think that's the kind of the take-home message is just communicate, right? I think the better the communication is between the designer and the developer, and the designer and the publisher, and developer and the publisher, and all the big kind of triumvirate. Or even once you include artists, then you got 4 people in there, or manufacturers, you got 5. Not that the designers need to talk to manufacturers, but once you get the communication going, I think everything just flows so much better, which is why using Basecamp and all that kind of stuff that we use with TMG really helped everybody, I think, keep abreast of what they needed to keep abreast of. So Michael was, hands off for the majority until it comes time to make decisions about the press, and then Josh is in there for art, and Yumi and Jay are in there right from the get-go, and when it turns to art, then Jay and I kind of just listen and step up when we need to, and I think that kind of communication system really works well for keeping the project managed in a way that is streamlined and efficient as possible amongst,
Yeah, I think
4 or 5 really creative people who have differing ideas.
Yeah, it works. I think it works best if there's an understanding up front of basically who's in charge of each part.
Yeah.
There's a conflict if 2 different people think they're both in charge of something. That's I think where you might get a conflict.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's been the case. I don't think I've ever had much of a problem with that. But I could see it. I could imagine if 2 people thought they were both the one that gets the final say and they didn't agree on something. I could see some feelings being hurt or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that that's ever come up in a big way for me at least. So that's good. That's something to look forward to, right?
Yeah. Hey, it may happen.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't happen because it's not fun.
Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to ask you one more question because it's 5 o'clock here, so that means it's 3 o'clock there. BGDF, is it still active? Are people still using it?
It is. It's very active. Unfortunately, I have not really been able to sort of participate. I got my start in Boardgame Designers Forum. I have a special place in my heart for that website because if not for bgdf.com, I don't think I'd be a published designer right now. I don't think I'd be working in the game industry right now. I don't think I'd be the person I am without it, because not only did I meet people like Josh Capel and Ariel Sewane and Dylan Kirk. I met all these people in the chat room back in 2003, and spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in the chat room. I spent a lot of time writing and reading posts, and I did a lot of my design basically talking in the chat room to whoever would listen or nobody, just saying it, like typing it out and thinking through ideas and posting stuff in the forums. Unfortunately, lately, I've not had a chance to really. I haven't had the time or really the impetus to get in there and sort of participate. However, at some point, I forget what year it was, number of years ago, maybe 2008 or so, the person who started the website, Michael Doherty, he couldn't do it anymore. He didn't have time or something. He couldn't be in charge of it anymore. And he asked me, since I was always around, he asked me if I'd sort of like take it over. And I was like, sure. I didn't want it to go away. So I'm like, sure. So I sort of did, and I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't really know a whole lot about like running a website or anything. I've got a few people that help me out with admin type stuff. Richard Durham runs the Game Design Showdown, which is like a monthly challenge, a contest that is basically it's more like an exercise than a contest. There's no prize really, but it's a good exercise, and I used to really like that. I'm really glad that exists. And then Matthew O'Malley, who is also a creative and good designer, he's just got he and Ben Rossit's game Between Two Cities just launched on Kickstarter. Right. He's technical and website minded. I think he does that for a living, and he sort of like helps out with the website type stuff for me because I'm completely unknowledgeable about anything revolving around that. Basically, so what do? I basically do two things. One, I pay the website bill every month or whatever, which I mean, it kind of sucks to pay like $11 a month for something I don't really use, but I want it to exist so badly that I don't mind so much. Every once in a while, somebody clicks on the donate link and donates some money, so that's nice. Anyone watching this who uses Boardgame Designers Forum, feel free to click on that donate link if you think you get something out of it. Feel free to do that.
Seriously, do that because it's an important thing.
There's no ads or anything. It's been very useful. I know it's been useful for me, and I'm sure it's been useful for a number of other people.
It's been useful for us.
Well, the other thing I do is, so a while ago we had a big problem with spam, and part of this is because I don't know how to use website stuff. I turned on the CAPTCHA or whatever it's called. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. And maybe there's some way to download something to make it better, but everything I tried didn't work. So I'm like, this is intolerable. We would have people join and like sit lie in wait for like 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden 3 different users would post like in a bunch of different threads about their watches or their medicine, right? And I'm like, and it got to be so irritating that I said, screw this, and I kind of went caveman route. I said, everyone who applies for an account gets an automatic email saying, reply to this email with reason, I don't know, I try to make it fun, like what games do you like and why do you like designing games or whatever. It's basically something to prove you're not a bot.
Yeah.
And once I receive that email, I have to go in and manually activate their account.
Yep.
This is not the best way. I'm certain there's a better way to do this, but until somebody else tells me how or does it for me, I'm not gonna.
Is it just like PHPBB?
It's Drupal, I think.
Oh, okay. I don't know that.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I feel a little embarrassed that I know nothing about it, but at the same time, I don't.
You don't really need
time to figure it out. And I know Matthew's busy, but I'm hoping that if he has time, he can work on it. Or somebody just recently applied, and no one likes having to come back later and log in, or get their approval. I do it like right away, and I approve like 3 to 10 a day or something. Like there are a lot of people joining. Well,
that's great.
The number of accounts that are started but don't email me is enormous.
Right.
Which makes me really kind of happy we do it this way, because I'm pretty sure most of them are bots, especially based on the account names. They're ridiculous. But so I'm a little sad that we're doing it that way. But unless somebody else can do a better job, I can't think of a better way to make sure there's no spam. And as a result, there hasn't been spam. So
that's good. No spam is good, right?
And I get to see like the number of people that are joining the site all the time. And some are saying they're joining because they want to promote their Kickstarter. Some are telling me they're joining because they want to do that contest every month. Some people don't say why they're joining. A lot of them are from Europe or Scandinavia or something. Or I don't know, they're from all over the place. Not everyone says much. They're like, yeah, I'm not a bot. But it's interesting. I don't spend as much time as I'd like on the website, but I'm glad it exists, and I can see that it's being used. I know that the Showdown happens every month. Thank you, Richard, for putting that on. And I used to do it myself, and I just ran out of time. So I'm glad that he took that over.
Yeah.
And so it's a resource. If you're an amateur game designer, I highly recommend it. I can't tell you where to look on there because I haven't been on, but I know that as a resource, there are people on there that all kinds of people. There's designer types, there's artist types, there's developer types, there's publisher types, there's print and play production types, or game crafter types. And I've made a lot of connections through there that we use professionally now, like Josh Capel.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's a lot of good stuff on there. I don't know if you know, Seth, did I ever tell you that Tortuga was based on your request?
I did know that.
For a pirate? For a pirate.
I don't know that you told me that, but I've heard you say it, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I actually was wondering, now that you've had a few more games come out, I'm wondering how you felt about the process from your point of view, working with me versus whatever happened with Tortuga versus whatever happened with Akratori, for example.
Um, they're all very different, right? Because I think they're very different sized companies, and there's language barriers between a couple of the companies and us, and um, they're different. I mean, it's a very different experience when the developer comes and stays at your apartment in Vancouver to play Ultimate, right? And on that
Wait,
note, I mean,
that happened?
that happened, didn't it? Didn't you go to
I didn't play
Vancouver?
Ultimate. I did go. I
Oh,
did
oh,
go.
I thought it was for an Ultimate tournament.
No, I was actually. Well, I was in Seattle for an Ultimate tournament. But also for a visit. So, Sue, this is to answer your question earlier. I go to Seattle every summer for Potlatch, which is a big Ultimate tournament, 4th of July weekend. And I stay for like a week because I've got a lot of friends up there, friends from high school, friends from college. I'm going in May because my college friend's getting married up there. My sister lives in Issaquah, and my brother-in-law, and my niece and nephew. So I go for like a week to 12 days every year. And
Yeah.
one year, it was right after we'd signed Belfort. I was like, hey, I'm in Seattle. I had a rental car. I drove up to Vancouver and spent a day with Jay. And I
Yeah.
stayed at his place overnight. And we went to we did go to the beach. It was very windy. We got a burger at some beachside joint. We showed me a bunch of his stuff. We played Train of Thought into the night. I took it home with me, and we ended up publishing that.
Yeah.
Train of Thought I still think is fun, great fun.
I think it's
And
a
I'm really
hilarious game.
better than it did. But
Yeah.
and we talked about Belfort. I showed him some of my designs. Probably I don't remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's true. That happened.
Yeah. And I mean, so Z-Man we see at the gathering, and I go to Quebec to do some stuff with them. So the companies that we have like more personable relationships with, um, I think we have better relationships with in general in terms of getting not only our royalties on time, but getting our points across to them in terms of what we'd like to protect about the IP or the design or whatever, and just a better working relationship in general. I find working with the bigger companies difficult because there's just those extra layers of red tape
Mhm.
that it's hard to navigate through. And like we said before, we're talking about communication. I know now in my heart of hearts that I will take good communication over an extra, 1,000 copies sold. Because an extra 1,000 copies sold isn't worth the headaches that it's causing me to communicate with some of the bigger companies that are for all intents and purposes incommunicado with the designers, and there are big companies that aren't like that. So don't take that as a negative against all big companies, but it's that sort of thing where you take the good, you take the bad, and it's only through experience that you realize that the bad may not be worth the good, and the good may not be all that it's cut out to be anyway. So yeah,
Have you
no,
have you found that the bigger company, the games that you've published via a bigger company, are they selling a lot more copies than a game that you've published via a smaller company?
we don't know yet. That's how bad it is.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, we haven't got our annual report, so that should be coming up at some point, I would hope. Um, and but
So
you know
that's
what?
something I've been curious about too.
It's also the quality of the game, right? I mean, um, a game like Belfort is a very costly game in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of shipping, all that kind of stuff. But it's done, fairly well for itself, critically and in sales. I'm sure Michael would love more sales, and I'm sure we would too. But uh, I know that Belfort for us is the game that we're known for, and so a lot of the other stuff that is getting critically acclaimed may not sell as well. Who knows? We don't. It's they're also different. That's the thing with us. We design so many different styles of games. It's really
Mhm.
hard to compare apples to oranges, because even Akrotiri, which is selling really well, it's a two-player game and it costs $20, right? As opposed to Belfort, which is a five-player game, takes 3 times as long and costs 60
3 times
bucks.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, Canadian, right? Um, and so, there's a lot of stuff where I would actually like to make another bigger box game just to see what happens. I don't know yet. So that's what we're working on next. Well, we're working on a lot of stuff, but the development process with some of the other companies, the bigger they are, the more hands off they are in general. Like not hands off, but they're doing what they're doing, and they know their market and they know their business. And so they don't keep us in the loop as much. And then the smaller
The bigger
companies,
they are, the more hands off you are.
well, yeah, that's I guess better the better thing, and not because we necessarily want to be.
Right.
Um, and then the smaller the company are, typically the more fun we have. To be honest, like it's fun. I like developing games with you. I like developing games with Ed. I like developing games with Michael. I like developing stuff because we all know any designer worth their salt knows that the game's not done the day it gets signed. It's done the year after it gets signed, and sometimes there might even be some stuff that's hanging on at the end there. But that process of design is not done the day you sign that contract, and so I really actually enjoy the process because it takes me to a place where I don't want to go, and that's a good thing. Like you push me into new levels of thinking about something for long enough that it changes it again.
Mhm.
And that's a good thing for me. It challenges me. So I don't mind being in the process. I know there's lots of other designers that may not like that, but I think for me to grow as a designer, it's imperative for me to still be a part of that. I mean, we've got, what, 15 games signed. That's not a lot compared to a lot of the huge designers out there. And so I don't think we're necessarily at the point where we can stop or say, hey, we're done, because we're not. So
Yeah.
in terms of
Well,
growth.
so yeah, there's something about like it's tough. Going back to what we talked about at the beginning, who am I to say whatever about designing, developing games? I've got one title out, or I got 2 titles out with my name on it, right? But that's kind of that's the kind of idea someone might have. If I tell them, hey, if they don't know who I am, and I'm like, hey, your game should be like this, they're like, who are you? Just some guy. Whereas if people knew that I was associated with, Scoville and Belfort and Kingsbury and Steam, and especially if they had played those games and liked them, that they might think differently about, my comments if I'm at, I don't know, a
Yeah.
Proto Spiel. Like that.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, like you could say, hey, that wall used to cost 3 wood and 2 stone, and I'm the one that said it should cost.
So, like, a lot of people nowadays are talking about Kickstarter this and Kickstarter that, and a lot of complaints that you hear are like, the Kickstarter lets you skip the gatekeeper, where
Yeah.
people say, oh, the publishers are the gatekeepers.
Sure, and
And
they're
I've
half-boiled.
never really bought into that. I've kind of usually argued against that because basically you can go into a store. You could have gone to a store before Kickstarter existed, picked a game off the shelf, and had it be awful. Like I've done that. Some friends of mine who weren't big into gaming, they enjoyed. I had them over to play some games. They enjoyed it. They thought it was fun. They went to the game store. They picked up some game on clearance. It was called Heart of Africa. Have you played Heart of Africa?
No.
I don't even remember who it's by offhand, but they couldn't figure out how to play it. They took it to my house, left it there, and said, figure out how to play this and then teach us. I couldn't figure out how to play it. I had to research online on BGG because literally they had like, this icon means this, and they had the wrong icon pictured.
Oh,
Like,
very nice.
it was that bad. Like, so that ties into all the things that we were talking about. Number 1,
Rules.
rules have to be better. Number 2, so once we played the game, it actually was kind of an okay game. But that's just evidence. That was evidence that I would use to argue against someone who says, oh, Kickstarter sucks because there's no gatekeeper. Well, when there were gatekeepers, it's not like they were doing their job necessarily. So I didn't believe that argument. However, what I could maybe say is that every designer could use a developer.
Yeah, I think so. Every designer could use a
Kickstarter
second
allows
set
you
of it.
to not use a developer. It allows you to get your game out there, and as far as anyone knows, they don't know that looks nice. Like if you buy pretty art, it looks nice, and they don't know. And this is maybe a similar argument to the gatekeeper thing, because maybe the people that are making that gatekeeper argument assume that publishers have developers, which they don't necessarily. Like some do.
Not all of them.
Yeah, not all of them. But so maybe a more specific thing is to say that every designer could use a developer, and Kickstarter allows you to avoid that. So I'm wondering, and I'm thinking it's not necessarily too far-fetched to think that there could be professional developers and people that are designers that want to get their game published and haven't gotten licensed and they want to use Kickstarter might go to that developer and pay them to develop their game, right? Like that might be a thing.
I don't think that's a far-fetched idea. I mean, there's rules editors, there's all sorts of freelance everything here under the sun.
Yeah.
I don't think a development team or development or playtesting team or anything like that is too far-fetched if you want to do a good job. It just depends on who's going to pay you to do it, right?
Right.
And I think it should exist, whether or not it gets paid for.
And I mean, these things do exist, right? Like I mentioned, Dale and Valerie for Dominion. Jay Tomlinson, as I understand it, he's basically a one-man operation, and if he wants development done, he hires someone else, like those guys, for example, which is great. And like I said, ever since I saw that, I thought it was a great idea. But let's say I were to post, "Hey, my name is Seth, and I'll develop your game for you for money." Like, who's going to take me up on that without a name? So, like, part of me wishes or would like to see a little more attention on the developer of a game, in addition, not instead of, in addition to the designer.
Yeah.
For that kind of reason. Like, if people, like every game that comes out of TMG, every big box game that comes out of TMG, and they're like, oh, look at all these first name designers. TMG must really pick the, is TMG just happening upon all the best first time designers out there, or am I contributing something of value to the process, right? So,
I would hope you are. I think you are.
Yeah, well, I hope so, and I'm hoping people will recognize. And I don't want to be too egotistical here, but I think I am contributing something to the process. Yeah. At least for those people who like all the big box TMG games.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to try to leverage that, get that into something that people know about, that people recognize, and that that build that up.
It's an interesting thing because just one of the things that I was talking about, just because reviewers kind of stick in my craw sometimes, when they don't mention the designers. Right, they'll just say this game from this publisher, and they don't mention the designer, and it's like, well, who made the game, right? Who designed the game is as important, if not more. And then I think the artist is important. I will always, chime in for the artist credits, and I definitely think the developer is an unsung hero. You're right. Now. There's some French companies like Ludonote who do the designer and then put the artist name on the front cover. Mm-hmm. Would you think that a developer's name could go on the front cover as well? I mean, I don't see why not.
Well, I mean, it could, and here's where it starts to get into a gray area. Consider, for example, Belfort versus Scoville. Yeah. Belfort, I put months and months into, and I worked with you guys a lot. Scoville. You've played Scoville? You've not played Scoville yet?
No, I haven't played it. I haven't even punched it yet, but I've seen it played.
The extent of my development on Scoville, and not to downplay my role, but Scoville didn't end up getting, or maybe as much work out of me, partly because I didn't have necessarily the time, but also because I'm not sure it needed it per se. Mm-hmm. Like when it had already had that kind of work. I don't know if Ed Marriott did it all himself, or if he had. Maybe he did a very thorough job in the first place, or maybe he had other people, like, I don't know, help him out.
Are you trying to say that Ed's a better designer than Jay and I? I think that's what you're trying to say.
I'm saying that Scoville was further along when I got a hold of it than Belfort was. That's
100%. I agree.
And so as a result, like I did, basically what I did for on Scoville was a couple of things. Originally, the peppers were piece limited, mm-hmm. and I didn't like that because somebody could hoard them and then stop other people from getting them, and that seemed that it was not part of it shouldn't be part of the game and would kind of break things. So I thought instead of, but I asked him why they were piece limited, and the reason was because people could just like collect an semi-infinite number of them, and then at the last minute sell them all for $1 million and get lots of points, and he didn't want that to be a dynamic in the game. So my development effort there was, all right, the pieces are not piece limited, so you can't hoard them and stop other players from getting them, but you can only sell 5 at a time.
Yeah.
That was what we ended up with in that one.
Yeah.
The next one, the other thing was there are these auction cards that you lay out right at the beginning, so you can plan ahead, which I like. And then halfway through the game, you like throw away the early deck and use the late deck. And he had it where you'd also throw away the face-up cards you've already turned face-up, and new ones come face-up. So if you were playing ahead, and then it becomes afternoon on you, your thing's not there anymore. And I don't like that at all, because if you're able to plan ahead, you should be able to follow through. So I said, leave those ones there. That's not a big change, but I think it's an important kind of thing. So I said, okay, well, so just don't discard the ones that already face up. We'll just, next time we replenish them, use the new deck. So like that's probably about it. There might have been a couple other small things, but that, and from the outset, the very first time I saw it, I said these peppers need to be, well, there were cubes at the time, different
peppers. Yeah.
I was really proud of that idea because it helps not only does it help colorblind people, but it also helps people recognize the relative value of them. And so that was like day one. I was like, yeah, these are obviously going to be different sizes.
Yeah, in the big scheme of things, then, not without disclosing exact amounts, when you developed a game like Belfort, I mean, I know the amount, but when you develop a game like Belfort versus a game like Scoville, depending on the time allotment that you put in, are you getting a different percentage in terms of are you getting a royalty rate on any of them? Are you getting a flat rate on them? Or now are you just the developer for TMG and you get a salary? I'm not sure how it works anymore.
That has actually changed. That's actually changed a bit over time.
Yeah.
In general, I get a developer royalty, which is usually less than the designer royalty, on the games I develop or have developed. And for a while, I was an employee and got a salary. And when that was the case, I wasn't getting it, like a game that we did then, I wouldn't get royalties on. But then when Mike kind of hired maybe too many people and couldn't support it all, I've gone back to royalty only to kind of help that situation out. Because I don't, I want TMG to succeed, so I agreed to do that. So
You're like Magic Johnson.
Yeah. So I'm back to royalties. So I don't know how specific I can be about that, but
no, it's okay.
In general, I basically get a developer royalty, which is, I think, reasonable. And I don't know that royalty is different based on how much work I do specifically on the development of that game, because I also do work on games I don't get royalties for, and I also do work like editing rulebooks and dealing with the manufacturer that isn't something that might not be obviously something that the royalty should cover, whatever.
Right.
Because I'm doing that kind of thing on games, so it all kind of works out. So there's we have arrangements in place that it kind of works out.
Keeps you living in the style that you're accustomed to.
Well, I've got an engineering job.
Oh, that's true. That's right. Yes.
And that keeps me living in the style.
That whole degree is paid for something.
Yeah, nobody gets into game design or development. Certainly, nobody gets into game design, as you know, to get rich, and certainly no one gets into game development. If game design doesn't make you rich, then game development won't make you rich.
No.
By a factor of 2. But I don't know. I'm trying to. That's kind of maybe related to how I'm trying to build up the value of the developer in the process, and also my brand as a developer and a designer. That question. I think we said this before we went live. I don't think we said it since we've been on. What's the definition of a developer?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, perfect. Good way to.
My current thought on that, and I'm not sure this is really accurate, but my current thought on that is that a designer is a designer that works on their own game, and a developer is a designer that works on somebody else's game. And the lines get blurry because oftentimes you're both. If you're working on your own game, you're both a designer and developer. If you're just developing someone else's game, then you're a developer on that game, but you might also be a designer of another game. Like, designing and developing are very similar, and it's very difficult to sort of differentiate the two. So currently I'm saying that a developer is a designer that works on somebody else's game. And I don't know.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know how accurate that is, or if there's a better definition. And I'm not even sure, like, maybe there needs to be some other different terminology. It doesn't help that in the video game world, they're the same thing. Right, a developer of a video game is the guy that designed the video game. work with a
Not
group.
really. Not
Well,
really.
they refer to it that way. They use that term. They use them interchangeably, or they use developer to mean designer, what I would call a designer. So to me, it's always been, and the comparison I always make is to books. Books have an author and they have an editor, and it's very clear to people the author wrote the book, the editor changed the words so that they sounded different, right? Like, to some extent. And so, to me, that's how games work. The designer is like the author, and the developer is like the editor. That's the comparison I've always made when I explain it to people, because a lot more people who ask what I do know more about books than they do about games, and so I
for sure.
it to the process, because it's a very similar process, I think.
I think so too. Yeah.
The author writes the game, the developer edits the game, the publisher publishes the game. Right? That's kind of the same as books.
Yeah, and in Europe, they're actually called editors, and the game designers are called authors.
And maybe it wouldn't hurt to use that terminology instead of designer and developer, right? Because designer and developer overlap. There's a lot of overlap, and there's a big question. There's a game to game. Any given game is, if you were to assign, X% was the developer's work and Y% is the designer's work, or vice versa. X and Y are wildly variable, right? Like anywhere from someone just had like the title and basic structure of a game, or with rules, complete rules, but like a lot of things were balanced or were final, versus another designer might have a game that's very tight and very well balanced and very well play tested. Both of those are the designer, right? From someone who, it's hard to say, like, if your buddy's like, hey, let's make a game about taco stands, and then he goes home, taco stands, that's not a designer. Your buddy can't say like, hey, you come back and you're like, I made a game about taco stands and I've sold it. Your buddy can't be like, where's my cut? Because I had the idea for doing a game about taco stands. Like, that's pretty clearly not a designer. But if your buddy had like rules to a game about a taco stand and you just tighten up all the numbers, versus if he had rules and numbers and you just change one thing, like, they're variable as to how much work each one did. And what's interesting about that is, depending on who you talk to, like, if you were to ask me and then you were to ask you separately, what percentage of Belfort was you and Jay? What percentage of Belfort was Seth? It's likely, because people value their own work, that we both have different X and Y numbers. For that
probably,
number.
yeah.
So it's very difficult to distinguish between design and development in that respect. So maybe using different terms would help. Maybe, I don't know if there's any way to communicate that to the player or the consumer. I'm not sure it's necessary. Maybe you don't need to. But
I don't know. But I think if you're trying to leverage the developer role into something that maybe a game that's being kickstarted by a little small boutique publisher who is probably the designer themselves, or could be the designer themselves, who may need some development work, then you do want that known. You do want your name out there. Hello, Kat. You do want people to know that Seth Jaffee does good work, right? So,
well, yeah, exactly.
I think there's a way to kind of do this, to leverage it into that. And it doesn't have to be anything in particular. Like, it doesn't have to be, you're setting up shop and you put out a shingle. It's just like, hey, you know what? I'm offering the service, and if people take you up on it, bonus. If they don't, then that's kind of their loss, right? You've already, like you said, you got a job. You do development for TMG, and yeah, exactly.
I don't really have time to be doing that at the moment, but I think in any case like that, or even a co-designer case, it probably needs to be stated up front. Are you familiar with the rabbit line from Dice Hate Me Games?
Yeah. I have your game. Yeah.
So Isle of Trains just came out. Here's a story about that. So my role, I'm listed as a co-designer on that game. I am. I think Dan would agree. I am a co-designer on the game. He would agree that, because I asked him up front. He asked me if he wanted to. So here's where that came from. Right about November or something, right before that contest, Dan had an idea for a game about trains that worked kind of like that, and we were at a design meetup and he was talking about it, and my cat is
Your cat is hilarious.
Great, however. So Dan said, he has this game. He brings it to our design meetup, and it was like 200 cards or something. And my biggest comment was, I think you should make this card, cut this down to 54 cards and enter the contest. That's starting next month. Because I just heard about that contest, and I thought this could do it. And then, I don't know, a couple days later when I was at Dan's house, and he asked if I wanted to be, to help him do that. He asked if I wanted to be part of that. And I said, okay, sure, but let me ask you. And I said, like explicitly, I'm like, do you want me to make comments and be like a playtester with comments, or do you want me to be a co-designer? Because I'll approach it differently, right? Like it's going to be,
for sure.
Basically the difference is, are you saying you want me to be a co-designer and be, co-owner of this game? In which case, when I make a suggestion, I'm going to back it up and fight for it and all that kind of thing. Or do you want me to be like, I'll play it and make comments like a playtester, and then it's your game and do whatever. And it was, I'm not sure if that might be the first time I explicitly had that conversation. And
with
he said,
anybody, you mean?
Well, I mean, professionally, when working with TMG, that's kind of implicit.
Yeah.
That, but I don't know that I probably have. I guess I have, but it seemed different to me for some reason. I'm not really sure why. But the point is, so I let him have that choice. I let him decide how he wanted to do it. He decided he wanted me to be a co-designer, so 50-50 co-designer. So that was up front, understood. And then we acted accordingly. And now the game is out, and it's got our names on it. Now, physically, what I did on that game, I feel was more like a developer role because he had the basic, the game. He had the actions that you do, what happens when you do each action. He had a draft of the game. I didn't make a new game experience. I just helped him make that one better and fit in 54 cards. So my role of what I actually did felt more like what a developer might do. And I'm listed as a co-designer because we agreed at the beginning that was the case. Right. And I don't think it's a misnomer. I think I did the work that I did on that game. I feel like was co-design. On the other hand, the work I did on Belfort, one might argue was like a co-designer. I'm not asking for my name on the box, but if it were, I'm not sure that'd be inappropriate, right? So I'm just not sure how you make that determination. At what point does a developer's name, at what point would it even be appropriate to put that on the front of the box? Here's another story, similar. Homesteaders, one of the first games TMG published. Mm-hmm. That's by Alex Rockwell. Alex Rockwell is a guy, he lives in Seattle, and when I was in Seattle on one of my trips, I was at, I don't even know where I was at. I was at somebody's game party at their house, and Alex was there, and they're like, hey, Alex, let's play your game. And so he busted out his game, and I didn't know this guy. I actually heard of him. He posted about Puerto Rico a lot on Boardgame Geek. So I'm like, all right, we'll play this game. So we played his game. I thought it was pretty cool. I liked it enough, and back then I had more time. I wasn't a professional game person. I didn't have a bunch of games to work on. So I was doing this as a hobby, and I really liked it, so I made myself a copy. I convinced him to cut a supplemental auction. There was this thing where, have you played Homesteaders?
Yep.
So you know how you can get resources and then you spend them on stuff?
Yep.
Well, there was this supplemental auction where you could get gold, for example, and then put gold up for auction to the other players. And so if you wanted gold and I made gold, I could sell it to you.
Right.
And at an auction similar to the other auctions.
Oh, okay.
And I thought it didn't work and didn't fit in the game and didn't make sense, and it took a lot of time and stuff, and I convinced him to cut that. So one might say, so I wasn't officially a developer on that game or anything, but I convinced him to do that, and I also played it a bunch and helped him tweak some buildings and stuff like that. And at one point I asked him, I was going to a lot of conventions and he wasn't, and I thought it was good enough to publish, and I asked him if he minded my showing it to publishers for him. Mm-hmm. And he said he didn't mind, and in fact he said he didn't mind if I put my name on the box like a co-designer. And I was like, okay. So I showed it to publishers. I showed it to Jay from Rio Grande, mm-hmm. and he actually liked it, and he took it with him to the gathering and stuff like that. And I was actually pretty hopeful. I thought it felt like the kind of thing Rio Grande would do, and I was really excited. I thought he might publish it. And I'm like, oh great, I've been involved in a game. It wasn't even my game. I was involved in it. It's going to get published. And well, then Dominion happened, and right. He ran out of time and stuff. So a year later, Michael was going to start TMG, so I asked for Homesteaders back, and Michael was going to publish it.
Right.
So that's what happened with that. Now, when Michael went to publish it, I was like thinking back to that conversation about how Alex offered to let me put my name on the box, and I decided at that point not to do that. I decided instead to call myself developer, which felt right, because I also believe in credit where credit is due.
Mm-hmm.
So I put myself down as developer, which seemed accurate, and Michael gave, he paid me a developer royalty, he paid Alex a designer royalty, and we published the game, or Michael did, I guess, and that's that. Now it's out there. So I guess I could have legitimately, well, as far as like having agreed with Alex, I perhaps could have put my name on that box as designer, but I felt like the work that I did was more along the lines of a developer, and at the time, even now, developers don't put their name on the box, right? So, I don't know. Should my name be on that box? I don't know if it should. Would it be appropriate? Maybe.
I was actually looking.
I don't know the answer to that question as to when it would be appropriate to put the name on the box.
Well, I was looking at this one.
Yeah.
And in the rules, it just says game development, TMG development team.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that one, this is how that one went down. So Scott Alms had a game. I played it, and I immediately thought a few things should be different. And we ended up liking it enough to publish it, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But so that one sort of went through a different process where it was like, so Scott did the design, then I got involved, I did some development, some like kind of like higher level development where it's like, balancing costs a bit, like whether things should cost or have the cost be the same as the price, have the, how much goods should you get from a average building, that kind of thing. Whether your starting building should give you one resource or two, that whether you should have a starting building like attached to your card or should it be like, some kind of higher level like stuff. I did a lot of that, and then after that kind of got to a point when it got to like adding all the characters and tuning all the characters. That was not me at all, really. I played little of the game with the characters. That was all, TMG Utah. That was Andy and Daniel and Michael playing all the time. And I'm not sure, how they divvied that up, but I'm guessing Andy as developer was doing most of it, of the development part and tweaking. But they did a lot of playtesting and a lot of tweaking without even my input because I'm not there. So that one went through like 3 stages. That was like the Scott Alms designer stage, the Seth Jaffee developer stage, and then the TMG team finishing off stage, so to speak. I did, however, with Scott, work on that one-player training dummy algorithm. I kind of got back involved at the last minute because people on the Kickstarter really wanted it, and I was thinking, how could you even do it? I actually was kind of against it at first. I'm like, no, it's not. Not every game has to be single player. But I thought, okay, well, in thinking of how I might do it, I came up with something I thought might work. I tried it a little bit, talked about it with Scott. We made it work, and now it's in there. So I got back involved at the end, but that one was like a 3-stage process, so to speak.
Yeah, it's crazy, eh?
Which in a way made me feel like I'd like raised a level as a developer, where I was like, I do the big developer, and like this, I've got lackeys that do this.
Minions. We call them minions.
Like you're a lackey.
Yeah. So you know what? It is I have to get going. I just realized what time it is. But I just want you to do one more thing, and then I'll release the hounds. Can you give our listeners, our viewers, one piece of advice that you think every designer should know? Just one. And
one piece of advice that every designer should know, and I hear Jeopardy music in the background, don't I? Wow. So there's probably lots of things that every designer should know, and I can't tell what they are because I feel like everyone already knows them, but that's not true at all.
How about from the development side?
What's that?
How about from the development side? What do you wish?
That's a good idea. So I'll go with this since it's on topic. Every designer should know that the developer and the publisher are on your side. They're trying to make the game as good as it can be. I guess this is directed at people who are really tied or married to things and don't want their game to be changed at all. earlier I think I said that if that's your situation, you should maybe self-publish. But that might be bad advice for two reasons. One, if you're a designer, you don't want to be a publisher. I'll tell you that right now. Two, if you're going to publish, like say you're going to use Kickstarter because you didn't want people to change your game, well, then you're in that group of people who are, dodging the publisher or the gatekeeper or the developer, and your game's going to come out, and it's possible that it might be one of those games that needed development. So my advice is, if people who are trying to help you make your game better are probably on your side and they're trying to help, so I don't know, listen.
Yeah.
Even if you don't end up changing things, maybe listen to what they have to say.
Yeah. They're all vested, right? Everyone's vested in this product.
Well, especially the ones that are, if it's a professional developer and a professional publisher and that's a publishing situation, then they're certainly vested.
Yeah.
But even if you're at like a protospiel event and you're talking to just some other guy who's also interested in design, they're probably not trying to sabotage you, right? So basically listen to all the feedback that you get from everywhere and maybe keep a little bit of an open mind, because someone else might have a better idea than you had when you started. It might happen, right? So if you're at protospiel, if you're at protospiel, listen to the comments. Even if you don't end up taking the comments, listen to all the comments and thank people for their time. And if you've got people who do it all the time, like a professional publisher or a professional developer, they're not trying to sabotage your game. They're trying to help. So keep an open mind. Don't. I'll modify this advice and say, have reasons for everything. If you really want to keep something someone else wants to change, you better have a reason to back it up, or else maybe you should consider the suggestion. That's got that's the only thing that came to mind that was on topic. That would be advice for designers.
I think that's great advice. I think it's great advice, man.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of us have done it.
Watch the early part of this interview and follow the rulebook stuff.
That too, yeah. All right, well, thanks very much for everyone joining us. Thanks, Seth, very, very much for finally coming on the show. I think, isn't Wednesday night your ultimate night? Isn't that why you can't usually show up?
Yeah, I play Ultimate League on Wednesday nights, so that's why I'm not usually around. I watch the after show, or I watch the show and the after show afterwards, but yeah. I usually play Ultimate. Now, in about a month and a half, I'm going to be getting surgery on my hip, so I'll be not playing Ultimate for a little while at least, and I'll be able to potentially participate, or at least participate by watching and commenting.
Oh, well,
so
we'll
watch
definitely
me in your comment section. What's that?
We'll definitely have you on live when your hip is injured. We take pity on the injured people. So
that sounds great. So well, it's already injured. Hopefully this will fix it.
Okay.
But yeah, I will watch for me in your comment section at least. I will definitely drop by and heckle the guests.